Hello, welcome back as we continue reading the Bible Jesus Read by Philip Yancey, and we're continuing with our final chapter, which is Advanced Echoes of a Final Answer. It says, the Jews, raised on volcanic images of Sinai, with a reverence for God so profound that they would neither speak nor write his name, would ever wait in fear, not just hope for the coming of the Messiah. But who can endure the day of his coming? Cried the prophet Malachi in alarm. For he will be like a refiner's fire. If the Lord of hosts paid a personal visit to the corrupted earth, would any of its inhabitants survive? Would earth itself survive? Yet, as Isaiah makes clear, the God who visits earth comes not in a raging whirlwind, nor in a devouring fire. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. He arrives instead in the tiniest, least threatening form imaginable, as an ovum, and then a fetus, growing cell by cell inside a peasant virgin. That egg divides and redivides until a fetus takes shape. And finally, a single baby bursts forth from Mary's loins to join the puny human beings on their speck of a planet. The Messiah rules, surely, but the rules are rules ruling with the rod of love. Who can endure the day of his coming? Anyone can endure it. All who come, he welcomes with love and gladness. In effect, the holiday we celebrate as Christmas memorializes God's answer to the Hebrews question, do we matter? Here on earth, for 33 years, God experienced in flesh what it's like to be one of us. In the stories he told and the people whose lives he touched, Jesus answered for all time that vexing question. Jesus said, God is like a shepherd who leaves 99 sheep inside the fence to hunt frantically for one stray. Like a father who can't stop thinking about his rebellious ingrate of a son, though he has another who is respectful and obedient. Like a rich host who opens the doors of the banquet hall to a menagerie of bag ladies and bums. And God loves people not as a race or a species, but rather just as you and I love him, one at a time. We matter to God. In a rare moment when he pulled back the curtain between seen and unseen worlds, Jesus said that angels rejoice when a single sinner repents. A solitary act on the speck of a planet reverberates through the cosmos. In his social context, Jesus went out of his way to embrace the unloved and unlovely. The folks who matter little to the rest of society, but matter infinitely to God. People with leprosy quarantined outside the city wall, Jesus touched, even as his disciples shrank back in disgust. A half-breed woman who had gone through 5 husbands already and was in no doubt in the center of the town's gossip industry, Jesus tapped as his first missionary. Another woman, too full of shame over her embarrassing condition to approach Jesus face to face, grabbed his robe, hoping he would not notice. He did notice. She learned, like so many other nobodies, that you can't easily escape Jesus' gaze. We matter too much. Novelist Reynolds Price said there is one sentence all humankind craves to hear. The maker of all things loves and wants me. And that is a sentence Jesus proclaimed loud as sweet thunder. The maker of all things is the maker of all human beings, an odd species that he unfathomably deemed worthy of individual attention and love. He demonstrates that love in person on the gnarly hills of Palestine and ultimately on a cross. When the prophets spoke about Jesus lived, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands, God said in Isaiah's day. When he visited the earth in the form of a servant, he showed that the hand of God is not too big for the smallest person in the world. It's a hand engraved with the individual names and engraved also with wounds. The cost to God of loving us so much. My doubts, I confess, resemble a disability more than a disease. They never go away completely. Now, though, when I find myself wallowing in self-pity, overwhelmed by the ache of cosmic loneliness that's articulated so well in books like Job and Ecclesiastes, I turn to the gospel accounts of Jesus' stories and deeds. If I conclude that my existence under the sun makes no difference to God, I contradict one of the main reasons God came to earth. To the question, do I matter? Jesus is indeed the answer. Next section is called, Does God Care? In The Soul of the Night, astronomer Chet Ramo tells this story. Yesterday, on Boston Common, I saw a young man on a skateboard collide with a child. The skateboarder was racing down the promenade and smashed into the child with full force. I saw this happen from a considerable distance. It happened without a sound. It happened in dead silence. The cry of the terrified child as she darted to avoid the skateboard, and the scream of the child's mother at the moment of impact were absorbed by the gray wool of the November day. The child's body simply lifted up into the air and in slow motion, as if in a dream, floated above the promenade, bouncing twice like a rubber ball, and lay still. All of this happened in perfect silence. It was as if I were watching the tragedy through a telescope. It was as if the tragedy were happening on another planet. I have seen stars exploding in space, colossal planet shattering distanced by light years, framed in the cold glass of a telescope, utterly silent. It was like that. Ramo adds one more sentence. How are we to understand the silence of the universe? The question haunts the rest of his book, and he returns to it often as he tells of his loss of childhood faith. For Chet Ramo, as for so many others, God's silence in the face of Earth's suffering poses a question with no answer. The fact that I am a Christian makes Ramo's question harder for me, not easier. For a person who sees the universe as a product of chaos and randomness, what should one expect but silence? How, though, can those of us who see it as a product of God's creative love account for the silence? How can we believe that God cares? Much of my career as a writer has revolved around the problem of pain. The book titles I chose: Where is God When It Hurts? Disappointment with God. Betray Me. Like Chet Ramo, I return again and again to the same questions, as if fingering an old wound that never quite heals. I hear from readers of my books, and their anguished stories give human faces to my doubts. I mentioned in another book a distressing week when two people called to talk about their experiences of disappointment with God. One, a youth pastor in Colorado, had just learned his wife and baby daughter were dying of AIDS. The mother had received a contaminated blood transfusion just before the delivery date. How can I talk to my youth group about a loving God, he asked me. How can I tell them that God cares? The same week, I also heard from a blind man calling on a public phone. Several months before, he had been invited a recovering drug addict into his home as an act of mercy. He had just learned that the recovering addict had molested his wife under his own roof. It's like God is punishing me for trying to serve him, he said. Blind, he began to imagine all that had been going on. Had the addict forced his wife, or did she cooperate willingly? Just then he ran out of quarters and the phone went dead. Silence. I've learned not even to attempt to answer the question, why? Why did the youth pastor's wife happen to get the one tainted bottle of blood? Why does a tornado hit one town in Oklahoma and skip over another? Why did that one woman's child get hit by a skateboard on Boston Common? I don't know. And frankly, after much study, I've concluded the Bible does not give us the answer. In his speech to Job, when God has a golden opportunity to enlighten us on causation issues, God avoided the topic entirely. I'm going to stop there for the week, and we'll pick up this chapter next week. And hopefully you're enjoying it and maybe starting to ask some hard questions. And we'll see you next week.